Chapter 8. Voicelines. Orange sun was setting quickly. Scourge crouched in the shadows of a cramped alley in the warehouse district on the outskirts of Jirunga, the planetary capital, watched it disappear. As darkness fell, the photosensitive street lamps kicked in, casting the entire district in a pale yellow glare. The illumination was enough to give Scourge a clear view of the two-story building across the street. From the outside, there was no way to tell that the structure was the Separatists' base. There were no autoguns on the roof. No guards patrolled the perimeter. The loading bay doors were ordinary Durasteel, rather than the reinforced kind used to construct blast doors. The windows were blacked out and several security cams panned back and forth, surveying the street. But neither was unusual for buildings in this district. Instead of military fortifications that might draw unwanted attention, the Separatists relied on anonymity and secrecy to protect them. They would be unprepared for the wrath about to rain down upon them. His comlink beeped softly, followed by Murtaugh's whispered voice. "Team is in position." "Hold until my signal," Scourge replied. "Give me time to take out those cams. Could be droids in there," Satchel chimed in. "You sure you don't want Murtaugh's team to go in first and clear the way?" Scourge gritted his teeth. Did Satchel know about Scourge's difficulties in taking down the droids at the UDM plant? Were his a way of saying, "I know your secrets. I know your weaknesses." On the other hand, if Satchel was just making a joke based on what had happened their last mission, then Scourge's paranoid over-analysis meant that the slimy little sycophant had gotten to him. Neither option sat well with the Sith Lord, particularly since he still wasn't sure whether Satchel was trying to get him killed. "Remember the plan," Scourge snapped. "The two of you stay back until I give the all-clear. We can't risk a stray blaster bolt taking out our Lord's favorite advisor. Leave the dirty work to me and your team." "Understood," Murtaugh agreed. Keeping Murtaugh out of the battle wasn't the best tactical choice, but it was worth it to keep Satchel away from the action. Scourge didn't need to be looking over his shoulder while he was fighting the Separatists. Plus, Murtaugh would be at a safe distance as well, just in case he turned out to be a co-conspirator. "I will send the signal once I poke out their eyes," Scourge said, rising to his feet. Careful to stay in the shadows, Scourge crossed the street of tilting adjacent to the base and crept around the back. There he located the utility ladder running at the side of the building and climbed to the rooftop, from which he could look down on the roof of the Separatist base. The gap between the buildings was substantial, nearly 10 meters. Scourge measured the distance, took a dozen steps back, then ran to the edge and leapt over the precipice. He pulled his knees up and tucked into a forward roll as he landed, then sprang to his feet, lightsaber on and ready. There were 4 cams on the roof, mounted on poles at each corner. In rapid succession he reached out with the Force and snapped them off one by one, sending them tumbling from their perches a shadow on the street below. "Target is blind. Move in," he said into his comlink. In the street below, small squads of Murtaugh's soldiers were approaching the building. Scourge waited while they launched their first forward flash and stun grenades, followed by a round of suppressing fire as the soldiers covered positions near the door. From inside came the sound of blaster carbines as the Separatists returned fire. Moving quickly but calmly, Scourge crossed the rooftop to the hatch built into the center. A few seconds later it swung open and a pair of Separatists emerged, snipers coming to the roof to take a position on the attackers below. Scourge hacked down the first with his lightsaber, then grabbed the second by the scruff of his collar and yanked him off his feet. The young human looked at him with abject horror, his panic so great that he never even thought to raise his weapon. The Sith Lord fed on the man's fear, savoring it as the heat of the dark side rushed through him. Effortlessly toting the sniper along, he took 3 quick steps toward the rooftop's edge, then hurled the man over. The sniper's terrified scream was cut short a second later by his fatal impact with the ground below. Scourge turned and raced back to the open hatch. He could hear frenzied shouts and blaster fire. An instant later, an explosion covered the entire building, followed by several seconds of silence. Another round of blaster fire, and shouting confirmed that Murtaugh's team had breached the entrance. Scourge leapt through the hatch leading into the warehouse's upper floor. There were no interior walls. It consisted of a single massive room. In the far corner, a staircase led down to the lower level. A row of mattresses along one wall, but the primary purpose of the space seemed to be storage. Crates and footlockers were scattered about, along with a haphazard collection of armor, weapons, and other military equipment. A computer terminal had been set up near the mattresses, along with 4 blank monitors that would once have shown the images from the security cams on the roof. Scourge registered all this without conscious thought. His primary focus was on the 20-odd humans struggling into their combat gear to join the battle downstairs. Unfortunately for them, that was never going to happen. Like a red wind, Scourge swept through their ranks, slashing left and right, peeling off limbs and decapitating bodies. Violent bursts of the force picked his victims up and tossed them around in ragdolls, breaking bones and shattering skulls. The Separatists offered virtually no resistance. They had been caught off guard. They hadn't expected an ambush from the roof. These were not soldiers. They were ordinary men and women who had received only the most basic training when they joined the cause. Gorge's savage and sudden assault, and the bloody carnage he left in his wake, sent them into a panic. He fed on their primal fears. Some he killed, others he left mortally wounded, and writhing on the floor, their lives enduring for 30 or 40 agonizing seconds while their high-pitched cries of pain fueled his bloodlust. Had the Separatists coordinated their efforts into a focused and organized counterattack, they might have been able to challenge him. But they just scattered, running for their lives. So Scourge drank in their terror and confusion, and felt the growing power of the dark side. He channeled the power and refocused it, sending it out in waves that rippled across the room, further inciting the panicked retreat of his enemies. When 2 women managed to resist the onslaught of fear and fight back, he was on them in an instant, cutting them down with a few quick slashes of his lightsaber. Everyone else was running. Some fled downstairs. Scourge let them go. They wouldn't get past Murtaugh's team. Others tried to hide, cowering behind crates and footlockers. But Scourge didn't need to see them to hunt them down. He could sense them through the force, trembling and sobbing silent, their minds numb with shock. And he stalked them one by one, breathing hard, not with exertion but excitement. It was over in minutes. Only then, standing alone amid the bodies, did Scourge notice that the sounds of battle from below had ended. Moving quickly, he crossed the room and descended the staircase. The floor below was similar to the one above, except for a row of offices built along the east side of the building. There were no interior walls. The floor was stacked with crates and piled with supplies. Bodies were scattered everywhere. Most were Separatists, but Scourge noticed 3 or 4 wearing Nyris colors. The rest of Murtaugh's team were methodically searching the dead, looking for survivors to interrogate. Scourge shook his head, knowing it was a waste of time. The greatest fear of any Separatist organization was betrayal from within. Only the 2 or 3 top people would know anything useful, and they would never have allowed themselves to be taken alive. Confident that the building was secure, he deactivated his lightsaber and clipped it onto his belt. Then he activated the comlink on his wrist. All clear, Murtaugh. Get Setch in here. Already inside, Murtaugh's voice came back to him. Found their control center in some offices at the back. George had to clench his teeth to keep from screaming with rage. He had given specific orders, and Murtaugh and Setchel had willfully disobeyed them. He made his way toward the offices with long, purposeful strides. As he approached, his anger gave way to suspicion. There had to be a reason they had defied him. Were they simply undercutting his authority, or was it something more sinister? Were they setting some kind of trap? As he drew near the offices, he saw both Setchel and Mo huddled at a comm terminal. Surprisingly, there were no other members of Murtaugh's team nearby. Gurge approached cautiously, probing with the force to see if he could detect any immediate threat. Neither turned as he approached. Their attention was focused entirely on the comm. Are there any others? Murtaugh was asking. Not that I can find, Setchel replied, but I might be able to. I gave you 2 an order, Scourge barked as he came up behind them. They both turned to face him. Murtaugh's lips were pressed tightly together, and he seemed to have gone pale. But Setchel seemed more amused than scared. After you were gone, I realized a flaw in your plan, he said with an ingratiating smile. If the Separatists had anything incriminating here in the base, they'd probably try to destroy it before we could get our hands on it. I told Murtaugh I might be able to salvage something if he could get me inside, but the longer we waited, the less chance we'd have to recover anything useful. Scourge didn't say anything, his eyes fixed on Setchel with a piercing glare. We would have tried to contact you, but you'd already started the mission. We didn't want to distract you. Do you take me for a fool? Scourge asked softly, his hand casually falling to the hilt of his lightsaber. Satchel's smile faded, and Scourge caught a hint of fear in his eyes. I don't normally disobey orders, Murtaugh said, jumping in to try to defuse the situation. But in this case, Satchel was right. Once the Separatists knew the battle was lost, they ran a cleanup program on their computers to erase all their data files. If we had waited for your signal, everything would have been lost. Scourge let the helm drop from his weapon. Now was not the time to settle this. But it was one more thing Satchel would answer for once he finally got a chance to speak with him alone. What did you find? A recording of a recent communication. Satchel answered, pressing a button on the terminal. A ghostly blue, three-dimensional image crackled into being, hovering a few centimeters above the holocom. The frozen image was slightly under a meter in height. A perfect miniature of the speaker. Darth Cedric's, Scourge gasped. Most of the core was already erased by the cleaner program, Satchel explained, but I was able to save this. Hit another button and the recording began to play. It was obviously damaged. The image flickered in and out of focus, and the audio was plagued by bursts of static that cut off much of what was said. Latest failed attempt, Cedric said, his voice thin and crackling. Nyrus is dangerous and must not be. Keep allegiances hidden. Stop the Emperor. Madness must end. Can you get anything more? Scourge asked. Not here, Satchel answered. Give me enough time and the proper equipment, and I should be able to come up with plenty. Tell your team to load up every terminal and data file they find, Scourge instructed Murdoch. Nerys won't be pleased if we leave something important behind. Satchel didn't say anything, but the grin on his face spoke volumes.